All right. Today, let's go ahead and talk about some of the things in the 1920s that were causing issues, that were social problems during the day. One of the big things that was really causing a lot of tumult in society were unions. Unions were still a relatively new thing, and most Americans at this point really um, didn't have a favorable opinion of the unions. And this wasn't helped by the Steelworkers Strike of 1919. What the steelworkers were upset about were basically working conditions, and they felt like they were dangerous and they were hazardous, and they weren't compensated justly for the type of conditions in which they had to work. One of the big things they really objected to was something called a swing shift. It turns out the steel mill operators, the owners, had figured out that steel furnaces, or furnaces that melted steel, in order to be efficiently run, had to be operated 24/7. And so what they would do is they would hire two shifts. You come work one shift, you work for 12 hours. The other shift would come on, and they'd work for 12 hours. And so that way um, the furnaces were able to go ahead and operate all day long. The problem is nobody liked working the night shift. That was a rough shift. A lot of accidents happened then because you're kind of tired anyway because you're working through the middle of the night, even if you'd slept during the day. And so they wanted to go ahead and work during the day. Plus, if you worked during the night, then you were awake while your family was asleep, and your family was awake while you were asleep. You never saw your family. So the steel owner said, okay, you don't always want to work the night shift. I get that. And so every 2 weeks, they go ahead and let you switch. Well, unfortunately, in order to switch, that meant that somebody had to go ahead and work two shifts in a row. And that was called your swing shift. It was a 24-hour shift. These were the shifts when most of the accidents happened, when most of the people were hurt. And these were one of the things that the steelworkers said, hey, you got to get rid of. And in fact, what they were arguing for was going to three shifts instead of two. So you're having to hire a whole new shift of workers, which would have been a significant cost for the steelworkers, or for the steel mill owners, so they resisted it. The union that represents the steelworkers is the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. Unfortunately for the steelworkers, it was poorly organized, poorly run, and the guy who led it, a guy by the name of William Z. Foster, was a communist. In fact, a lot of the early union organizers had communist or socialist tendencies, and that was something that people in the United States didn't like. They were distrustful of, and so it frightened people. The end result is that the strike was broken in 1920. By the end of the day, they brought in state militia, they brought in local security, the Pinkerton detectives, they brought in federal troops, and there was a clash, there was a fight. The steelworkers were going to go ahead and go away quietly, and 18 steelworkers end up dying. So as a result of that incident, Congress goes ahead and investigates, and the results of that investigation come in 1923 with the Protestant Interfaith Committee report. And basically what they say is, yeah, the steelworkers are right. The conditions are horrible, and they're dangerous, and they should get paid more. And so the committee's report basically aligns with what the strikers were complaining about. Contrast that with the plight of the coal miners. The coal miners had very similar concerns. They weren't paid very much. Coal mining is a very dangerous business till this day. And so they went on strike around the same time, 1919. But the result was very, very different. Their leader was a guy by the name of John L. Lewis, not a communist. He was organized, and he, in fact, he's not represented by the AFL at all. They formed their own union, the United Mine Workers. The result is the government intervenes and says to both of them, says to the unions and to the mine owners, look, we can't have you stop. We need energy. The government can't shut down because you guys can't get along. And so the government steps in and mediates. And the end result is the miners get a 27% wage increase. So on the one hand, you get the steelworkers who get nothing. They get kicked in the teeth by government forces and by the factory owners, the mill owners. But the coal miners, on the other hand, have a peaceable solution, and they get a 27% wage increase out of the deal. Another case that really caught the nation's attention was the Sacco Vanzetti case. Kind of like the Scopes trial that we've read about before. This was kind of one of those trials of the century. Everybody followed it. Sacco and Vanzetti were two Italian immigrants, and they are accused of robbing a payroll in Braintree, Massachusetts, back in 1920, in which the two folks who were delivering the money, the two guards, were killed. Sacco and Vanzetti ended up being convicted and electrocuted in 1927. The case against them was largely circumstantial. They really didn't have any direct evidence tying him there. And Sacco and Vanzetti, at least the traditional narrative has been, they were convicted just as much because of their immigrant status and their political beliefs as anything else. Sacco and Vanzetti were anarchists. In other words, they believed that we shouldn't have any government, that governments by their very nature are tyrannical, and so we just want to get rid of all government. This is, again, a very controversial political belief, kind of like communism, and so we really were not very sympathetic to Sacco and Vanzetti. And a lot of people have maintained their innocence for a lot of years. Until recently, they were actually able to, they still have the gun that was found on one of them, or owned by one of them, and they've done ballistics because they still have the bullets too. And the bullet that killed at least one of the guards did in fact come from that gun. So it's a little more hard evidence, but as we look back on it, yeah, Sacco and Vanzetti probably did it, although the evidence they were convicted on at the time, probably not enough to actually convict them at the time. All right, why don't you go ahead and pause the video right here. There's a few questions. Let's see if you can answer them, and we'll see you next time.